Hey all, just thought I'd give you a bit of a tour of my 1970 Chrysler Valiant Regal 770. It's a coupe, so that means it's a two-door with the sloping roofline at the back. It's known as a hardtop because there's no B-pillar here, so it's all open. So it's, as you can see, it's in reasonably straight condition. It's not perfect though. I'd say the paint on it's about 20 years old. Originally it was an aqua blue colour. Someone's painted it and replaced the vinyl roof. And as you can see, Aftermarket Wheels. It's got some World Racing forged aluminium wheels. They're really light, so you can pick each of these wheels up with the tyre with one arm, no problem at all, which is very cool. What else can I tell you about it? It would have been, when it was new, it was a 318 small block Chrysler V8 with a 904 Torque Flight 3-speed automatic transmission. It would have had discs on the front and drums on the rear. All of that's been upgraded. I'll talk you through some of that. Probably from a bodywork perspective, at the front you'll see here it doesn't have a standard grille and front on it. This grille and front is off of a Chrysler VIP of the same era, but this car wouldn't have come from factory with that front at all. Wouldn't have even been an option. So they would have had a single headlight front with actually the rectangular headlights is what they would have had. But this one's got the spotties on there as well, which is kind of good for driving at night. You can see it's got the V8 badge on the boot, on the bonnet, and it's got bonnet pins as well. Someone's added that. But yeah. Alright, let's have a look inside. The interior is in pretty good condition for its age. It's all original. I don't think anyone's ever touched the interior, so you can see there's wear marks on it, but overall it's all here and it's completely serviceable. Some of it's quite good condition still. Not much room, not much leg room in the back for adults, but certainly fine for kids. Let's jump in the driver's seat and show you a bit about the interior. So these came out with this dash, which is what they call the 770 dash, which is the tacho and speedo and mile an hour there. The standard cars in this era didn't have a tacho, and they had a big ugly dash. This is the nicer looking dash. It came out in the 770s and the Pacer, which was the sports version of this car. Other things to note: the steering wheel here, it's actually off the VIP, which these are rare. They didn't make very many of those, so they're a lot nicer than the standard steering wheel. The material surrounding the outside is like a leather wrapped rubber, whereas normally they were like a hard plastic kind of feel. So this is quite nice. Other things of note: it's got it's got a air conditioning unit under the dash here, which isn't connected, but is certainly good to have it here. This is the air conditioning control unit, which is standard, would have been in the car from factory. And it's got a vintage radio, which is actually a digital radio. It's just made to look vintage. One other point to note there is the oil pressure gauge, which is handy in a car like this with a modified engine, because the oil pressure is one of the key pieces of information to know if your engine's running right or if there's a problem. So it's handy to have that there to keep an eye on. Otherwise, the interior has got the coffin box center console, which is what they call this style of console here, which is in really good nick. I'm really happy to have it because the cars that had the auto on the tree are a little bit less desirable. If I can show you here, this is the little hidey hole for the cigarette lighter. It's kind of cool. It still works. Yeah. So overall, the interior is in really good nick, which is quite handy. All right. Now, I'm going to show you, I'm going to go underneath the back of the car and show you some of the modifications that have been done to the rear. Particularly around the rear axle. So these tyres here are Mickey Thompson 255 by 15 inch, and they wouldn't normally fit on a car. These model cars, they wouldn't fit under the guards, so they've had to do a couple of modifications to make that work. Specifically, if I can get under here, I've got a torch handy. So what they've done right here is, with this spring hanger right here, they've moved it inboard towards the centre of the car, and that's moved the whole spring over. They've done the same thing at the front, and that allows you to fit a bigger tyre before it hits the spring, basically. So that's one thing they've done. Another thing they've done is they've put a Ford 9-inch modular aluminium housing diff in it, which is that big silver thing there. And in there is a what's called a torque worm or a torque drive diff center, which is like a true track, if you've heard of that. And it's got 3.7 to 1 gear ratio, 35 spline axles, which are the bigger, tougher axles. It's effectively the diff setup for drag racing. It's got disc brakes all round, so they're all rotors on 4 corners with upgraded calipers at the front and Commodore style calipers at the rear. It's got a twin 3-inch system all the way to the back, a H cross pipe in the middle. Sounds quite good. Yeah, the front end, can't really see it from here, but the front end's all been redone with new suspension, steering, etc. So it handles really well, surprisingly, for an old car. Just pop the bonnet, show you under there. There we go. So what we've got here, standard engine would have been a 318 small block Chrysler V8. This engine that they've replaced that with is based off a 360 small block Chrysler, which would have been standard in some of the later models, like late 70s versions of these cars, and sold a lot in America in Dodges, Plymouths, and Chryslers. So what they've done is taken a 360, they've put a stroker kit in it, which takes it out to effectively 410 cubic inch. And then with this engine, they've put Edelbrock Performer RPM heads on it, which have been worked by an engine builder named Peter Little. Sitting on top of the engine is an Edelbrock RPM air gap manifold, which is one of the better units to get on these engines. Inside the engine, it's got a solid roller cam with solid roller lifters, and it's also got Yellow Terra roller rockers, which I think you can kind of see just in there. Not that that really matters. Other things to note: the fuel line has been covered in heat proofing to try and keep the fuel as cool as possible. And the carby is a Holley 750 double pumper, which is quite a decent carby. It's a high performance sort of thing. Probably the limitations for normal use is it doesn't have a choke, which means cold startups can be a bit of a pain, but not too problematic. At the back there you can see the red MSD distributor and MSD coil. Over to the left there's the oil filter's got a remote hose going to it, so the standard factory position for these oil filters is always difficult to get to, so this makes it easier to service. The brake booster and master cylinder have been upgraded to larger units. It's got a pacemaker extractors, quite nice long extractors. The radiator's a standard unit out of a later model Chrysler, so it's a 26-inch V8 radiator out of probably a CL or CM Chrysler, which is better cooling capacity. The fan is just a regular old fixed fan. I'd probably like to upgrade that to twin thermo fans to make sure I can keep it cool on a hot day. And maybe it probably wouldn't like sitting in traffic right now on a hot day, probably struggle. Otherwise the engine hasn't got much on it. It's mechanical fuel pump, water pump, alternator, that's about it. It's pretty simple. The trans is a 727 torque flight, which has had a lot of work done to it, and there's a trans cooler just sitting right here to help keep that cool. Yeah, I think that sort of covers all the main things. I'd like to tidy up the engine bay a bit more. There's a lot of wires and tubes everywhere. Needs a bit of paint to cover up where it's worn and fill some drill holes that have been put in. I'd like to move the battery to the boot. Yeah, thermo fans for the radiator. Tidy it up a bit. But otherwise it runs really well. I think the bottom end is supposed to be forged, but I don't really know for sure. I haven't been able to eyeball that yet. So the crank, the rods and the pistons, I was told they're forged, but by the person I bought it from, but I won't know, at least until I take the oil pan off and have a look at the crank at some point to find out for sure. Either way, it's a strong motor even if they're not forged, so I'm sort of pretty happy with it. But yeah, there you go. There's the Chrysler Valiant Regal 770 coupe. I'm having fun doing up little bits and pieces and slowly tweaking, and hopefully one day I'll get it on the drag strip, see how fast it goes. Right.